Oh, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome along to this really quite special webinar from Taumata Arawai as everybody comes flying in from the lobby. Great to see so many people who have chosen to spend their lunchtime attending this webinar on the Drinking Quality Assurance Rules update. My name's Tim Cadogan. I'm the engagement specialist here at Taumata Arawai, and it's my great privilege to basically be the link man for today's event. I'll get us underway with karakia, and then we'll go on to what we're actually up to. So, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I hi aki ana te atakura, he tio he huka, he hauhu, ti he Māori ora. Righty ho. So today we're going to be looking at the rules that have been consulted on. Just my job is to tell you how we're going to go about this. You may already have noticed that your mics are disabled, but of course you're all going to have questions, that's undoubtable. So please put those questions in the Q&A box. The chat box actually shouldn't work for you, but if it does, it's not going to be monitored. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, and our anticipation is to get through our part of it so that we can get to your questions in plenty of time to have them asked before the end of the webinar. Just one other thing that we've found with webinars that we've done is sometimes people will ask a follow-up question as a comment to somebody else's question. That gets really complicated for everybody concerned. So could you please, if you do want to have a follow-up to somebody else's question, make it a distinct part of the Q&A, because otherwise, yeah, as we say, everybody gets a little bit confused. Also, if you're watching this recorded off our website and a question comes up that doesn't get answered through the course of the webinar, feel free to send us an email to technical@taumataArawai.govt.nz. Now, I'm just going to get our four presenters today to introduce themselves and their titles and so forth. So, Jim, we'll start off with you.
Kia ora tātou, ko Jim Graham aho. I'm Chief Advisor Water Science with the Authority, Taumata Arawai, and with regard to this project, I was the project lead. Oh, sorry, let's go to Noah.
Kia ora koutou, ko Noah Hensley aho. I'm Manager Technical Advice with Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai. Hand over to Courtney Ruth.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Courtney Ruth toku ingoa. My name's Courtney. I work in the Water Services team in the North Island, and I am based in our Hamilton Regional Office, and I've been supporting this project.
Marvellous. Looking forward to hearing from all of you very soon. I've mentioned that this will be going up on the website, so for everybody involved, obviously it's being recorded. I think we're all quite used to that with doing webinars now. So this webinar is the first in a series, and we'll give an overview with deep dives to come. So there will be further webinars that will go a bit deeper into everything. If through the course of this webinar you think of a topic that you'd like a deep dive on, let us know. Probably through the email would be the best way to go. Right, that is always enough from me. So I'm going to pass over now to our first presenter, a man who actually needs no introduction in the world of water, Jim Graham.
Kia ora. Thanks, Tim. Can we have the next slide? I'm just going to run through background to the changes here first up. And many will have heard me speak about this before. The main change is actually around the format of the rules, and simple fact of the matter was that the way the rules were written, our lawyers felt that they were possibly not enforceable, or parts of them weren't enforceable. And in government, there's a particular legal format for secondary legislation, and this is secondary legislation. And I guess if you look at our CME, Compliance Monitoring Enforcement Strategy, you'll see that we have an expectation that water suppliers comply with the rules. And I think that in future, it may be that we take or want to take enforcement action for water suppliers who don't comply. So we needed to have things in that proper legal format. We also wanted to simplify and clarify a lot of things. We wanted to remove a whole bunch of footnotes that were in there. The other thing was that the rules had followed a kind of a loose format that came from the Ministry of Health, what they call the Ministry of Health called standards, drinking water standards for New Zealand, which were standards and rules actually. And the original version of those Ministry of Health standards was developed when it was voluntary, compliance was voluntary. And so they had a very kind of a explanatory nature and a lot of guidance in them. And that carried through after they became mandatory. And we carried it over early on into our first set of rules. We wanted to change that because a proper legal document doesn't have a whole lot of guidance in it. The guidance is separate. So we wanted to remove the guidance. We wanted to apply source water classes to bacteria and viruses, introduce compliance around viruses, and a major shift around the focus of our cyanobacteria requirements. And we wanted to refine the chemical rules. So the focus has been on the source water and treatment rules. And I think there's still a bit to come on the distribution rules. There won't be a whole lot of wholesale changes there, but we've got a lot of work going on around distribution systems and what we want there. And so the format of the distribution rules is something that at some point in the future will change. I don't think that's something that you need to worry about at this stage. The idea here, though, is that we'll stick with this format for quite some time. We think we've got it right, and we don't anticipate making wholesale big changes like we've done or a big review like this for quite some time. Thanks. Next slide, thanks. So just going through what we heard in consultation. So next slide. Major support for what we were doing. So probably overall support was in the region of 80%, 85%. So people were happy with most of what we were doing. And an example was the change to the reporting year, to a financial year. So there's something like 95% support for that, which was really good, and that's a change that's you will have seen we're going to make. People raised concerns about costs, and I think they're very legitimate, those concerns. We do understand those concerns, and we did respond to a lot of them. So after consultation, we made quite a lot of changes to reduce cost. For example, things that were monitored monthly, we changed them to monthly from the previous rules. We put them back to annually if they're less than 50% of the MAB. And so there was a lot of those kind of changes back to reduce cost. I think we acknowledge that the bulk of the cost is in setting up the reporting. And I think that our response to that is, yes, we understand that that's a big cost, but we want to get this right, and we want to get it locked in for quite some time. And so while there's a cost now, we don't anticipate that cost of the changes around the reporting and the way things are reported will occur again for a very long time. So next slide. The other thing that we got a lot of feedback on was the need for guidance, and we are very aware of that. We had intended to produce guidance for the current set of rules. In the end, with this review, we decided to hold off. There's a big project we're just starting on guidance. We have been getting a lot of input from our technical panel. There will be guidance. Noah's managing that project, and we'll release probably guidance in tranches, but there will be a full set of guidance about everything that's covered in the rules, and we'll let people know more about that as it comes. I guess the other thing was one of the big changes around cyanobacteria and the shift to monitoring for cyanotoxins in treated water. So that's quite a big shift, an important shift. And it aligns our approach with cyanobacteria, cyanotoxins with our approach for other contaminants. So that's quite a big change. After the consultation period, we went back to Cawthron, and we engaged them to help us out with some further changes. And then we went back to a group of submitters who'd submitted on this to see if we make sure we got things right. So we went through a process after the consultation period with a lot of submitters who'd made comment about that. And of course, the other thing that we included was the intention to include pressure monitoring distribution zones, and there was a lot of support for doing that, but the message we got from people was that it needed further work and further thinking through. So we had engaged a team from our technical panel. We're doing further work on that, and we'll let you know what happens with that. Ultimately, we want to introduce pressure monitoring and distribution zones, but we need to be careful how we do it, and there'll be a lot more consultation. I think, as I said before, distribution systems is the part of the rules that we haven't looked at. And so that's a bit we want to have a look at. I don't think, apart from pressure monitoring, I don't think we'll be introducing a whole lot of more requirements, but watch the space. We'll keep you informed with that. And just before we go to the next slide, one of the great things about releasing your rules is people come back and tell you what you didn't get right. And there's just one little thing that is quite important that I want to mention, and that is where we said that if you were using a higher set of rules, so if you had a T2 or a T1 supply and you wanted to use a T3 rules, we said that you would have to use the S3 rules to go with the T3 rules. There's some unintended consequences of that, and we're re-looking at that. Unintended consequence was that a T2 supply would have to start continuous monitoring of their source water the way level 3 does, and there's a cost implication. So just letting you know that there is something that we're looking at there. The other thing that I wanted to say was there's likely to be a revised set of rules introduced before the 1st of July now. So that's not an amended, that's just revised, and a couple of things we haven't got in there yet, but we want to get in there. For example, rules for desalination and using marine waters as a source. We've been asked to do that, and we want to do that. And so it might include reverse osmosis as a technology. So there's a couple of little things there, but they're not going to be things that will cause water suppliers to do further things. Okay, next slide. Here's a couple of key changes. I'll go through a few and then I'll hand over to Courtney Ruth. So I talked about the legal format, and you will have seen it. It took me a wee bit to get used to this, and I wasn't so keen on it initially, but now that I've worked with it a bit, I think it's way better, and it's got rid of the footnotes and the tables, and it's just much easier to follow. Next slide, thanks. Suitably qualified and experienced persons. We got a lot of feedback about this. I think the problem was that a lot of people thought it meant consultant, and it doesn't. So I've given you a couple of examples there. So for representative sampling, you probably need to engage someone external, because it probably needs a groundwater hydrologist for something like that. But source water class determination, I would have thought a water supply would have capability in-house to do that. Sanitary borehead assessment, water supply should be able to do that. It's an engineer can do that. The cyanobacteria assessment, some water suppliers have a lot of cyanobacteria expertise and have been dealing with, particularly the water suppliers that have had cyanobacteria issues. So they might have the expertise. Otherwise, a water supplier first time might engage expertise. Backflow prevention program, water suppliers that have got a good backflow program have probably employed somebody around backflow, and that's probably someone who's suitably qualified and experienced. We'll provide guidance on all the things where we say suitably qualified experienced person is required, and we'll talk about what kind of expertise and qualifications they should have. Next slide. Downstream suppliers, and I'll just take up a little bit of time on this. So this is a new class that people have been asking for, and we've taken a while to get this out. It's been a very difficult thing to get organized. I'm going to read from this because I need to get it right. So downstream supply is drinking water suppliers that receive drinking water from another drinking water supplier, but the owners are different. So that's the key thing. And it might be a networked supply that's downstream that has treatment, or it might be a network supply that doesn't have treatment, or it might be a self-supplied building. And so we've got a water supplier that's upstream that's not providing potable or compliant water with the DWQAR, and treatment is required for the downstream supply. That makes the downstream supply if the owner is different. Or if it's a network and they don't have they're receiving compliant water, but they've got significant risks. For example, hydrants, significant water storage, etc., then they would be a downstream supply. And you might have a situation where there's a self-supply building that's a downstream supply. So to give you some examples, large sites that receive drinking water from another drinking water supplier, such as ports, airports, retirement homes, hospitals, prisons, military bases, or university campuses, are not necessarily downstream supplies unless they've got additional treatment or they've got specific additional risk factors. And we'll provide a whole lot of guidance, and we're going to do that quite soon, about what those risk factors might be. For example, a retirement village connects to a council supply and provides drinking water to its residents. The retirement village is located on one property. The retirement village owner owns and operates its drinking water infrastructure and only has a small amount of emergency storage on site. Additional treatment is not required or not installed. In this situation, the retirement village is not a downstream supply. Here's another one: a subdivision, private subdivision, which serves 500 people, 180 separate properties, and connects to a council network. The separate body corporate owns the subdivision's drinking water infrastructure. The subdivision has fire hydrants and long-term storage. In this situation, the subdivision would be a downstream supply. I'll give you another little one. I can think of an example. Seddon in the South Island would be a downstream supply. It's a rural supply is their source, the Awatere supply. Seddon takes the water from the Awatere supply, treats it, and distributes it to the community of Seddon. That's a downstream supply. There's another one in Hunterville. So we'll provide you with guidance. Downstream supplies just use the existing rule modules, and you can see there what they are, and that's set out in the rules. Next slide, thanks. And the reporting timelines, we're shifting, of course, to the financial year. It does create a bit of a problem with what we call an interregnum. And so what we'll do is, for the current year to the end of 2026, we'll just do everything as normal. And at the end of 2026, water suppliers, we'd like to provide compliance information just as they normally have done in the past few years. And then we've got this 6-month period, we call it interregnum. In other words, it's a period between two different ways of doing things. What we'll do with that is we'll seek just a very limited transitional data set from water suppliers. So you won't have to report on everything, but just what we think are some key parameters. And we'll provide a whole lot more information about that for you. And then on the 1st of July 2027, we'll start with the new rules. And people will start reporting against those new rules straight away and after that first month. Great. And I think that's all of me. And I think from here I hand over to Courtney Ruth, who's going to go through some other changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, I'll be going over the next couple of slides. So the first one is around the changes to the rule codes. So on the slide, you'll see in the top left-hand corner, we have some of the current rules, and then we have how they map to the 2 new rules there. So the new codes have 3 parts to them. The first part is the module letter, so G, S, T, or D. The second part is 2 letters for the sub-module. And for this example, it's RR for our reporting rules, and then there'll be a rule number for the last part. So this change will take a little bit to get everyone's heads around, but hopefully it will help us slot in new rules into the sub-modules if we ever need to do that without changing the rule codes in future. You'll see on the slide we've got a highlight around this for every non-compliance, so we'll just talk about that next on the next slide. So some of the other general rule changes include non-compliance reporting, or what some people refer to as exception reporting. So this is a new requirement where suppliers will need to let us know when they are compliant to any of the level 3 treatment or distribution rules. There's also some other changes to the general rules section. One of those is some data loss and grab sample rules. These have been separated out for each source, treatment and distribution zone, and I definitely recommend having a look at some of the timeframes around that because they are different depending on which module you need to use those for, as well as the continuous monitoring rules. It's a similar thing there. And lastly, for general rules, we have the addition of clarifying that on-site analysis Lab analysis systems that are IANZ accredited are also appropriate to be used for samples. Next slide, please. Next, we'll move on to some of the source changes. So the first one is around the changes to classes. So our current classes are 1 through 4, and these are now changing to A through D. As Jim kind of touched on, we've got the new class, which is Class A. This is brand new, and we don't have a current class that's the equivalent. This does not require a bacterial or protozoa barrier, but a supplier will have to have evidence that there's absolutely no contamination within those sources, and definitely no contamination from viruses. There is still quite a lot of strict requirements around this class, including our current requirement around sanitary bore heads, a lot of testing and continuous monitoring. Similarly to our current class 1, there's an interim class to get you to class A if you don't have all of the test results yet. You'll also notice on the slide that we've got a bit of a like for like table down the bottom there. So you can see that if you are in a current class, you can actually map to a new class without having to do an assessment on the initiation of these rules in July 2027. So a lot of the requirements, whilst you might have a new class letter, aren't changing from our current class. Next slide, please. Some other changes to the source water class rules include how we've kind of framed the modules. So we've got our common rules, which have all of the rules that are common across all of the classes. That's to help simplify any repetitiveness in the rules. And then we've got a module for A and B, and then a module for C and D. And as we mentioned, there is the class assessments that are required by a suitably qualified and experienced person, and those are required for classes A through C every 5 years, but will not be required when we initiate these rules on the 1st of July 2027. There's also a rule around representative sampling that is applicable for classes A to C, and we'll also touch on some rules around cyanobacteria in the next slide. So the cyanobacteria rules in the source water section, on first read through, they might be a little bit confusing, but just take your time, have a look at the guidance we're going to release. There'll be some flowcharts to help you. But as Jim mentioned, we're shifting the focus from source water into treated water to be similar to our other rules. Suppliers will have to undertake an assessment of the likelihood of cyanobacteria being present in their sources, and then where there's a high or medium likelihood, they'll have to do some more testing. So there's a couple of different options that a supplier can adopt depending on how they would like to manage cyanobacteria risk. They can either test for toxins directly in their treated water, or they can do some further source water testing depending on whether or not they are likely to have planktonic or benthic bacteria. So for planktonic, there's some steps involving microscopy to determine concentrations, and if these exceed thresholds, then you'd have to do some more testing. If you find anything, then you'd have to test in your treated water. Similarly for benthic, there's some inspections or mat coverage assessments that must be done. And again, if you identify any bacteria, cyanobacteria, then you do some further assessments, and if those come back positive, then again you test in your treated water. So a little bit complicated, but it is, you could just pick the option where you just test in your treated water for all toxins as well, and we'll touch on the treated water rules a little bit later on. If we move to our next slide on bacterial and protozoa rules, so not a lot of changes to these. We did propose to remove chlorine dioxide, but we have retained this option as a bacterial barrier. And we've also proceeded with removing some of the protozoa treatment barrier options that we consulted on, or consolidating some of the log credit requirements. We have put a little screenshot of the new recycling rule in the protozoa section. This consolidates the rules that were in the individual protozoa sections and puts it all in one rule, so it's really easy and clear what is required depending on where that recycled water is coming from. Next slide. So we're still in the treatment section, and now we're looking at the chemical monitoring rules. We've added a new rule around requiring certificates of analysis for the chemicals that are used within a treatment process, And we could also specify a certificate of conformance to a specified standard in future, and we'll let you know about what would be one of those standards. This is something that chemical suppliers have and should be able to be accessible. We did engage with some of the chemical suppliers through this process after consultation to confirm that this would be appropriate. As Jim mentioned, we've also done some work to bring in the reduction of testing where results sit less than 50% of the MAV, and we've also removed the event-based monitoring rule as we consulted on. The next slide is around cyanotoxin rules. So as I mentioned in the source water section, where you find indication that you might have cyanobacteria or cyanotoxins, you will be required to do some further testing in your treated water, or you can go directly to treated water testing and do that. We've also removed the rule around the response plan. While this is no longer a rule, we would still expect suppliers to retain response plans, and these should be embedded within their source water risk management plans and or their drinking water safety plans, and we may review those as well in future. There's also some further testing to be done where toxins are found above 25% of the MAV, which is the second of the cyanotoxin rules. So definitely recommend having a look at those as well as the source water section to get your head around the cyanobacteria rules, because they work quite closely with each other between source and treatment. And then my final slide is on distribution rules. Now, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of changes to this. It's mostly around consolidating, rewording, and reformatting. And as mentioned, the pressure rules that we consulted on have been removed for now. So keep an eye on what we are doing in the background, because we'll release some more information about this in future. But we do appreciate all of the information that was provided in consultation, because it gave us a great start for how we're going to work on this portion of the rules in the future. So I think that's my last slide. So now I'll hand over to Noah.
Thanks, Courtney Ruth. So I'm going to go over a bit of the timeline, what you can expect coming up, and also what do you need to do as a supplier. So in terms of us as the authority, we'll be fielding your queries. We'll be producing guidance for the level 3 rules. There'll be some transitionary reporting guidance that comes out. So you probably have some questions on that. We are aware that you will have questions on that, and we'll prepare that guidance. There will be drop-in sessions, as Tim has mentioned. We'll be updating our internal systems to receive exception reporting and new rule IDs from July 2027. So we have a whole year to get this set up and in place. We will also receive compliance reports. In the meantime, as usual, no changes there until March 2027. Suppliers, so you'll need to review the updated rules. You'll prepare to comply from July 2027, just reinforcing that those rules don't come into force until July 2027. You have a year to prepare for those. There will be some actions that you might need to undertake before then, and you might need to start some of those now. And so keep an eye out for our guidance. When in doubt, ask us questions. You can either send those through to the technical@telmatorawai.govt.nz email. That's really for queries about rules and the changes to them. If you have direct, specific questions about your drinking water supply, I'd ask that you contact one of the water services officers in your region, and they'll get in touch with technical. We all talk to each other and work through these questions together. If you have queries about access to the Hinakarako portal or submitting your reports, it's best those questions are directed to opsupport@telmatorawai.govt.nz. Could you just step back a couple slides? Yeah, there you go. So attend our drop-in sessions, read our guidance, ask questions, submit your monthly and quarterly reports as usual during this time frame. Prepare your 2026 annual report as usual, and start preparing for reporting changes with more guidance to come. Next slide. So starting from March 2027 to June 2027, we'll continue fielding queries, we'll continue producing guidance, and continue having drop-in sessions at the, and we will start receiving your 2026 annual reports. We'll be testing reporting systems at this stage, so we'll be implementing the new reporting to receive exception reporting for continuous monitoring, non-compliance, and new rule IDs from July 2027. So all that new reporting stuff is only from July 2027. As a supplier, you'll need to prepare to comply, so keep working on what you need to work on. Read our guidance, ask questions, attend those drop-in sessions. You'll submit your monthly and quarterly reports as usual during this time period. However, there will be an interim report that you'll need to prepare, and you'll need to also prepare your annual 2026 report by 1st of April 2027. Now, if some of you are cotton on, that is not the time frame that is currently in the rules. We are allowing an extension to the 1st of April 2027 for that. We realize there's a lot of change going on at the moment, and we just want to give people the amount of time they need to submit these reports. You also need to start preparing a reduced 6-month report for the January to June 2027 period, and that will be due by 22 September 2027. That's all written in Schedule 2. Once June's here and gone, we'll talk about what you need to do next. Next slide. So the authority is going to receive your reduced 6-month reports. It's kind of like an annual report, but quite a lot. There will only be certain requirements that are mandatory for that. Everything else will be voluntary. And that will be for the period of January to June 2027. We want to make sure we have enough information that we collect to make sure that you're complying and that the water is continuing to be safe. But we recognize that we probably don't need everything for that period, as it's just a 6-month period. We'll be receiving reporting in accordance with the updated rules, so that new set of rules from July 1st, 2027. There'll be bugs. We can pretty much guarantee that, but we will be fixing them and working on continuous improvement. Hopefully we'll work through most of the bugs, particularly the big ones, through the testing period before this. We'll be updating guidance as needed as well. So as a supplier, you'll need to comply with updated new rules from July 1st, 2027. You'll need to submit reports using the new rule IDs. You'll also need to submit non-compliance exception reporting for continuous monitoring rules. This will be something we'll have guidance on. We've had our data team working on the kind of framework that will be you'll need to report under, and there'll be more information on this shortly in the coming months. You'll also need to submit that reduced 6-month report for January to June 2027 by 22 September 2027. We felt that we'd give you quite a bit more time to do that one as well, just with all the change that's happening. Great. That brings us to a close. Look, thanks for attending. Thanks for being interested in this. We've done a lot of the work, and now we need you guys to go out and comply, prepare to comply, read those new rules, and yeah, we'll get on to questions. Feel free to uptick questions that you really want answered. We might not be able to answer every single question out there, but yes. Also, please create a new question. Don't ask questions in the comments of another question, that we might miss those. So first question was, are we going to be given a copy of this presentation? I've replied to that, and we'll put a copy of the presentation and the recording of the webinar on our website shortly after this webinar concludes. I've got a question from Deborah Roslaughlin. Can I clarify that GCH2 means that everybody now needs a hygiene code of practice? So in the current rules, G11 requires all suppliers to have a hygiene code of practice. So there shouldn't be any change there. Tatiana has asked a question about what's the relationship between SQEP and authorizations framework that Water NZ is working on right now, if any. I'll let Jim answer that question.
Thanks, Noah. Yeah, just going back to Deborah's question, it's a general rule, applies to everybody, and that rule is about not letting people who are unwell work on your network, etc., etc. But to Tatiana's question, there's no link at the moment between SQEPs and authorizations. The authorizations framework, Water New Zealand's doing some work on it, but it's the authority that implements the authorizations program. So that's actually legislation which requires us to implement it. So Water New Zealand is doing a lot of background work, which is really helpful and we appreciate. But at this stage, there's no connection. There may be in the future, but it'll be quite a long way off.
Thanks, Jim. Steph Marshall has asked a question. Under the new S3 cyanobacteria rules, will suppliers, assuming they already have a robust cyanobacterial procedure developed by professionals who have assessed the sources, and which has been proven in real time to retain compliance and water safety? I like that caveat there, Steph. Will suppliers be able to defer their existing plans, or are they expected to exclusively follow the new cyanobacteria rules? If we are expected to forfeit our existing plans, don't do that. How are the new cell count levels determined? They seem incredibly low when many of the sources are extremely large. So I would say we definitely don't want you to get rid of your plans if those plans are working. They kind of become a part of your safety plan. You do need to manage your risks, identify your hazards, manage your risks through your drinking water safety plan. Jim, do you have more on that one?
Yeah, so it's been quite deliberate, the change to prescribing what's done, but any water supplier that's got a management plan and any water supplier with a cyanobacteria in their source water should have one. Don't abandon it by any means. Include it into your source water risk management plan because that's the correct place for it. And one of the ideas behind this whole approach was to fit things where they ought to be, and management of risk is suitably placed in source water risk management plans or drinking water risk management plans. And so don't abandon it, just shift it and put it in there. You should have definitely a response plan to what you're going to do if you find cyanobacteria. The rules set out the monitoring you need to do. With that cell count levels, that's all, we didn't just think that up. That all came from engagement with Cawthron, and so that's scientifically validated levels, and they were calculated. Jonathan at Cawthron calculated those levels out quite carefully. So yeah, they are low, and what we found in all this work was that the levels that had been previously set out in different places were actually quite a risk.
Great. Thanks, Jim. We have a question from Noel Roberts on T3BF.1a FAC rules, which requires that turbidity monitored at the outlet of a contact tank is monitored at the outlet of a contact tank before lime is dosed. Several plants dose lime before the contact tank. They would require a major redesign to achieve. Is there any science of chlorine being dosed before post-lime dosing? So the requirement to monitor turbidity is applies to where you dose the chlorine. So where you're dosing the chlorine, that should be the turbidity that you're monitoring, essentially. I don't think we have any requirements to do that major redesign, but happy to take that offline. Jim, do you have any further questions on that one?
No,
Or answers?
the simple fact of the matter is that additional lime obviously impacts turbidity, and so the intention here was simply to make it possible to put your turbidity monitoring ahead of your lime dosing, and that's a flexibility that's been in the rules since the Drinking Water Standards for New Zealand that the Ministry of Health has had. So there's no actual change there.
Great, thanks. It's also probably worth noting that with pH adjustment, dosing lime raises the pH. It also that impacts the efficacy of chlorine to actually kill pathogens. So if you have your contact tank at a high pH, you'll need to make sure that your CT is being met if you use chlorine as for your bacterial compliance. Thanks, Noel, for that question. Again, happy to follow up on that one about those specific situations. Philip Evans has a question. Taumata was in discussions with 2 companies that provide reporting services. There was a discussion that Taumata might contribute to the cost of making changes to these reports. Is that likely to occur? So we're aware that these reporting agencies are widely used by the sector. We won't provide any direct financial resources to them, but we will be working with them quite closely to make sure that we can streamline the changes that need to be made. Deborah has another question. How do we determine if someone is a water supplier rather than just a water supplier supplying through a network? Jim, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I will. And I see Deborah's got another question about a water carrier and Christchurch has a question there as well about their parks and gardens. So I think there's a whole lot of detail in here, and the best thing to do is to look at our guidance when we release it. And if that isn't any help, contact your water services officer, your local water services officer, and they'll give you the definitive answer. There's so many situations that people will want to question about, and I don't want to start saying yes and no here, and then people saying, yeah, but he said on the webinar blah blah blah. Link to respond to Judy's point around the parks and reserves part of council. I think it's highly unlikely that would be, in spite of what I just said about not making decisions in front of everybody. I think that's highly unlikely, but check with Rachel East and she'll tell you. I think what I would say is it'll be pretty obvious downstream supplies, and we'll get really clear about it as time goes on. We have a few more examples, but we've got 12 months to figure it out, right? Because the requirements about downstream suppliers are in the new rules, and they don't come into effect until the 1st of July 2027. So you've got plenty of time to ask your water services officer around the details. Thanks.
And just a note on that one, if it's within the same council, then the ownership is the same. And so that's probably the part that's quite important for that one. There's not a different ownership for that second part of the supply.
Right. I'm just going to jump back up. Steph, it doesn't seem like we've answered your question fully. Courtney Ruth, do you have that question in front of you? It says, that didn't really answer my question. Apologies for that. Are suppliers able to rely on our existing cyanobacterial plan for response/compliance, or will it be enforced that we must comply with the levels TA have set? I'm assuming set in the drinking water quality assurance rules.
I can't see that, but I can probably just respond. So you will need to comply with our rules depending on where your likelihood assessment sits. So it may be that your plans or your response plans need to be slightly adjusted to kind of meet our minimum requirements, but that doesn't mean that you would need to fully kind of redo your plans. It sounds like it might just be some slight adjustments to some of those thresholds, but you will need to comply with our rules.
And I would encourage you to reach out to your water services officer if it's around a specific supply. Going through some questions. Here we go. Hayden Jackson has a question. If a water treatment plant was intending to use the protozoa rules that have now been removed, can they be re-included?
Yes, simple answer. Yes, they can. So the rules we've removed were rules that no one was using, and so we didn't see the point in having them there. But and I'll give you an example. A company's come to us and said we're interested in providing a desalination treatment plant. You don't have any desalination rules. What rules should we work? And we said, well, we'll get some. We'll write some. So if there's a technology out there that somebody wants to use, a water supplier can come and talk to us, and we'll consider it. I'm not going to say that we will write rules for everything, but we'll consider it. And anything that's been removed, if you think it should be brought back, come and talk to us about it. I think it's unlikely that we would want to bring back things like direct filtration for 3.5 log. I think that's unlikely, but other technologies, yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to look through that specific situation and work that through with you. Philip Evans has a question. Taumata Arawai was, oh, we've already answered that one. Moving on. VSCs. So Deborah's asked a question on very small community rules, and she's been working with very small communities. There's a bit of work. I'll probably just speak generally about this. There's a bit of work for us to do on how the very small community rules fit in. So there'll likely be a bit of a review of those rules coming up. Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so we will always be reviewing rules. I think that's a given. And I mentioned that that we'll be looking at the distribution rules of level 3. We will be going back to level 1 and level 2 rules. There's some emissions there that we want to think about. We're wondering about RO for level 1 and 2, and the VSC rules as well. We may well have a look at. So I would never say anything's set in stone and we'll never change it. But at some point we will have another look at the VSC rules. Just looking at Deborah's thing here, says you need a water safety plan, therefore you need to follow a multi-barrier approach, therefore you need treatment disinfection. Since the change, that means the VSC do not have a water safety plan. Does this mean that you are not expecting them to have treatment? Well, hang on. They have to provide safe drinking water, right? So that's in the legislation. So simply, yes, you cannot, if you're a VSC, provide water that is not safe to drink. And you still do have to take a multi-barrier approach because that's in the legislation. So I think the simple fact of the matter is, yes, we are expecting them to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
Deborah.
it would be pretty hard to provide safe water at that level without treatment. So, and I've noted that we will review those. We'll need to review those rules. So, what were you going to say, Courtney Ruth?
Sorry, no. I was just going to say there's also the part around the acceptable solution. So the acceptable solution is a completely different pathway that someone can pick if they don't want to adopt the VSC rules, and that's a more prescribed pathway, and that's why we explicitly state that you have to have UV for that pathway, whereas the VSC pathway is slightly different. So suppliers can opt for either one depending on their scenario.
Philip Evans has a question on the reporting. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it, but we'll try. The provision of our water services is moving to a new entity on 1 July 2027. Who's responsible for the 1 January to 30 June report due in September 2027? That is a tricky one, but that should be accounted for in your arrangements through that transition period. It's best if we don't tell you exactly what to do on that one. I think that needs to be sorted out with the organizations involved. Courtney Ruth, do you have any insight to that one?
Yeah, it's probably a who is best suited, because in a lot of cases where they're moving into a new entity, the same people may be moving into the entity. So it could just be the same person from a council supplier moving into that entity. So it could just be that person could continue to do that reporting. Where you might not have that crossover, maybe someone else is doing it, it would just be some discussion between the two. I know for a lot of councils that where people are not moving, they still have some time in that transition period to support with things like reporting, where the time frame is after that transition period. So it's really just a conversation between the two organisations and whatever works best. If you're having any issues with accessing Hine Kōrako to ensure that reporting's done, please reach out to our operations coordination team, and they can just make sure the right people have access to the right parts of Hine Kōrako, and they're really good. They've already done a lot of the transitional stuff for some of the ones that have transitioned over today, so they definitely can help you with making sure that reporting is done by the right people.
Thanks, Courtney Ruth. Jonathan Barnsley's asked a question. In your discussions with Cawthron, did you explore the capacity of the lab to deal with samples in a timely fashion with much lower cyanobacteria cell counts? For some suppliers, they may be greater than 20 times drop in the limit to trigger cyanotoxin testing. So I was just in a discussion with Courtney Ruth on this. Would you like to talk about some of the work we've done with labs?
Yep, definitely. So part of some of the work we did with Cawthron included some engagement with the labs to understand who currently had the capability to do some of the testing that we are going to specify with these new rules. And we're still working on encouraging some labs to get accredited so that there's a greater pool of people who can do that work in future. So it's a work in progress, and hopefully with the release of these new rules and some further engagement we will be planning to do with the labs, more of those labs that do have the capability but aren't accredited will go through the accreditation process in the next year to ensure that we have enough capability across New Zealand for all of the additional testing we're going to do. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there, Noah?
No, that was great. So Noel Roberts has asked a question relating to the fact that change precedes an event, and I think change precedes a contamination is the kind of principle of drinking water that you're referring to. I think it's really worth acknowledging the amount of change in the sector at the moment, and there comes risk with that. I think it's worth also pointing out that there hasn't actually been a lot of changes to the rules. We were mindful of that, and we did get feedback on this. So we did try to minimize the amount of change to the actual rules. Largely, we've changed them to make sure that they're more clear, they're more direct. You can tick the requirement and say, yep, I'm compliant, and there weren't questions around that. Some of the changes are from July 2027, and we will work closely with suppliers to manage this change, especially to the reporting, because it's largely a kind of mechanical system that just needs to be adjusted. So, Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Not really. I think you've said it. I think the key thing here is in terms of the rules, there's not a lot of there's very little change, if any, to what water suppliers actually do in terms of the operation of their water treatment systems and water supplies. There's not a lot of change there. There's some change around the reporting, absolutely, accept that. And I guess I take your point, Noel. But and we did consider this and we took it all into account. But the decision we came to in the end was that this needs doing, and we need to get on with it and get it done. And probably there's never going to be a time that everyone's going to say this is a great time to do this. There's always going to be change in the sector at the moment, and so we figured that actually we should probably just grit our teeth and get on with it.
Yeah, that also that reminds me that I think in terms of reporting systems, we know the system that we're implementing will work for hopefully a decade, if not more, and making sure that the new let me get the name right, water service providers that are out there are set up for their reporting from the beginning. That's, I think, a really key step, because if we delayed them, that would be a delay to their update of their systems. So it's just a bit of a step we have to take, acknowledging that there'll be some problems to work through, some issues to work through, and we will definitely be working through those. If you are struggling with timeframes or see some risks, please make sure you get in touch with your local water services officers. There's quite a few questions, so I just have to work my way through which one's been upticked the most, which is great.
We got time for one more, Noah.
Yeah, one more. Okay. Ooh, we've got a tricky one from Neil. Look, I will probably don't have time to answer that one. What we'll do is make sure that we include these in the FAQs that we have on our website. So any questions that are not answered in this webinar, and even some of the ones that were, if we think they need to be included in the FAQ on our website, we will do that. We'll try to answer one more. Simon Armstrong has a question on reporting. Has the technical information been released to the two companies that provide reporting services so they can build templates for reporting and then issue them to us? We have a significant number of reports to update. So yes, we have been in touch with both Luttra and Water Outlook. If there are any other reporting services out there, urge them to get in touch with us. And we are providing updates regularly with them. We have a whole work stream that's dedicated to making sure this reporting goes smoothly, as smoothly as it can.
It sounds like a great point to conclude this on. So it's my job to thank all the people online who have watched this, be that one of the 184 people who did join in. And that's really gratifying, sitting from an organisational viewpoint and knowing how much work went into this, that so many people have joined. And I'm sure many of you will be watching this as a recording. So thank you also to you. Thank you to Courtney, Ruth, Noah, Jim and Grace, who's been the magician behind the scenes, making sure that everything works right. And remember, if you have thought of something during this, particularly if you're watching it in a recorded situation and you've thought of a topic or a question, just get straight in and get in touch with us, technical@taumatearawai.govt.nz. So without any further ado, we'll conclude today's webinar. Look forward to catching up on further topics with you all, and thank you all again for your attendance. Thanks very much, everybody.